morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of MP 2026. Yesterday, we talked about the rails. Today, we're going to talk about what happens when the software starts using them for us. We'll start with what's happening now, then move to the slightly terrifying question of who is effectively allowed to act on our behalf. To kick us off, it is my privilege to bring in our first keynote speaker. It is my pleasure to welcome Mathieu Altweg, Senior VP, Head of Product and Solutions for Europe at Visa. Let's give him a big round of applause. So Mathieu will actually set the scene and show us what happens to commerce and payments in a programmable world. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Nira. Thank you. All right. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be back at MPE. It's very difficult to do any presentation these days without talking about the incredible amount of change that we see across our industry. Not only there is so much of it, but the speed at which things are changing is striking. My name is Mathieu. I lead our product team for Visa across Europe. And when we look at this change, specifically in payment, I call it the big convergence. It's actually the convergence of three things. We see identity and payment converging. We see the convergence of choice, where different payment funding source and payment rails are converging. And finally, the third one, we see the convergence of experience, where we are solving digitally and physically for our daily lives. Now, one example of that change, very concretely, recently we've seen the opening of NFC access across devices. We've seen players like BBVA, Klarna, or Visa, Visa Mobile Pay take advantage of that capability. They are transforming their digital surface as experience hubs. They're extending themselves into a face-to-face use case. In fact, this was the main narrative last year here at MPE. Now, over the last 12 months, what another massive, huge leap forward in AI. I don't even think that 12 months ago, I was actually using it. Now it's a daily thing, and I'm sure it's the same for all of you. Now behind that is code. And it's hard to comprehend that the same platform are less than 4 years old. You know, if you take the 3 largest GenAI consumer platform today, they represent more than 1.5 billion active monthly users. That same number 6 months ago was half of that. So that's the speed we were talking about. The adoption curve is nothing like we've seen before. Behind that is code. Code is everywhere. Now, I ask that same large LLM to help me represent this. This is a Mr. Coffee, an automatic coffee drip maker. It was introduced in 1972. And then, you know, it took over. Every single European and US households had one of these at home. Actually, I had one of these at home. My father had one of these at home. And you know what was so cool about that? This. Come 7 a.m., where we were still, you know, coming out of our bed with the smell of coffee. Coffee was programmed. This, in fact, wasn't my father's preferred coffee machine. This was my father's first line of code. And from that moment, and for the next decades, things really changed. Actually, code started to democratize, but in a very complex and very sophisticated way. You know, technology had its own language. You know, in order for technology to do anything, we needed to learn that language. Very different languages, actually, very specific syntax, shortcut, handshakes. And as a consequence, only a few of us we're able to manage and talk to that technology. We can do a little show of hands, which would be quite interesting. How many of you in the room are actually coder or programmer? Or how many of you actually had a coding background? Can I do a little show of hands? It's actually pretty good. Maybe at the end of this presentation, I would have proven the rest of you that you're wrong. This paradigm is shifting. The world's most advanced technology, that is generative AI, is now being wrapped in the most natural and simple interface, that is language. AI allows us to just give it our intent, to describe what we want in a way as natural as a written or spoken language. This shift of paradigm is enabling us to really take advantage fully of that new capability without having to use code. This is the biggest unlock since the creation of the graphical user interface. More simply said, the mice is exiting and the mind is entering. Okay, so what does that mean for all of us? For consumers, for businesses? Well, interestingly, we already program our lives. Like my father with his coffee. We set playlists, we curate playlists, we organize our finance, we use PFMs, we have monthly wires that move from one account to the next, and many more. The user interface has evolved accordingly. Now you can toggle right, toggle off, you can drag and drop, but we will agree it's still relatively simplistic. I would say that we are in a state of highly interactive, not really configurable, and certainly not yet autonomous. As this mind enters the pictures, we are moving from being payment users to actually being programmers of our daily lives. So with that big shift upon us, it's interesting to reframe the problem statement. What happens to a commerce and payment in a programmable world? So I went back to my LLM friend and I said, hey, why don't we start with a definition? What does programmability mean in payment? And the answer was pretty good. Let's read it together. Programmability in payments is a shift to financial systems where consumers or business intent can be expressed in natural language and execute automatically. More specifically, people and business describe the outcome, how money should move under which rules and conditions, and the underlying product, rails and assets can be wired to deliver it safely. That's pretty good. So now that we have a definition, why don't we try to apply it to what we know is already happening in consumer payment? Identity, choice, and experience that we talked about and that we discussed last year. Now, if we add programmability to it, there are actually three interesting questions that we can answer for merchants. How do we personalize experience without fragmenting them? How do we enable choice but without introducing more friction? And how do we offer this at scale but without compromising on the security and the trust that we know and exist today? So what could that mean for our three items? Well, identity, verifiable credential, can confirm intent or identity status. Choice becomes event-driven payment or financial transactions with clear permissions. And finally, agent-enabled experience, where agent can act on behalf of the consumer with the consumer intent and within the guardrails of the merchants. Okay, so let's have a look at all of these, because things are already happening across these three dimensions. Let's bring them to life. Experience. Let's start with experience. Here, we clearly see agent is playing a central role. I think it's just a matter of 6 to 12 months before all of you would have experienced an end-to-end agentic transactions. And you know, we are very excited about that space and very invested in making that space a reality. Across experience, something else is happening. You know, I think programmability can significantly enhance what we call existing experiential proposition. It's not about adding more benefit, but it's ensuring that the benefits are truly relevant. They are triggered in the context and in the moment. Let's take an example, for instance, launch access. Many of you use that today. Many of you have that attached or embedded to your card proposition. Well, as an example, instead of having a static entitlement, launch access could be dynamically packaged and triggered at the right moment, leveraging traveler status, time, location, and certainly transaction context. Choice. Hard also to talk about choice and programmability without talking about stablecoin. What an incredible technology and new use case. For the merchant community, some immediate value comes from faster settlement, cross-border money movement, efficient in different currencies or locations where money movement takes longer or is more frictionful, and certainly improved treasury and liquidity management. In stablecoin, we also see some very interesting new models emerging. Stablecoin-backed cards that become stablecoin wallets, or more advanced use case like on-chain lending that take advantage of the programmability that's built within the money for stablecoin. Okay, let's tag along. Identity. Well, we talked a little bit about verifiable credential. Verifiable credential allows us to confirm intent, to ensure that the conditions are met between trusted parties, and these conditions can be identity signals or identity status. And ultimately, that will enable new transaction type to happen online without compromising on security. How can you renew your mortgage today fully online? Verifiable credential and identity attributes enable that to happen. For merchants, this could mean interesting use cases too. You could have age or eligibility verification built in and without friction. You could also have delegated payments in a B2B flow, for instance. Or you could also ensure authentication repeated across multiple channels. Identity will work hand in hand with programmability, and this will allow to adapt, to interpret, to execute with a strongly verified intent. Excellent. So, because I am a product person, and in order for that programmable world to actually happen, we believe that we need to build programmability within. I call it designing for programmability. And interestingly, we already starting to see a couple of first principles to be true. And I think they are true if you are building solution as a merchant, as an acquirer, as an issuer, and certainly as a payment network. What do we need? We need, first of all, a robust infrastructure, an infrastructure layer that we can play with. We then need, a set of clear permissions and some form of smart contract construct. We need data visibility to ensure that the intent matches the execution. And finally, these works together as a smart translation layer. Intent becomes instruction, instruction becomes action, and action can iterate so that we can improve performance over time. So accordingly, we started to evolve the Visa stack. Let's show how programmability starts to be built within. Tokens becomes agentic tokens to support agent-based transaction. Click to pay, the seamless, secure checkout, becomes actually digitally native credential that can be retrieved on demand. And this expand across new browser types checkout use cases that we see. Passkeys connects to verifiable credential, and then biometric authentication becomes strongly verified intent or strongly verified identity status. And one more thing. We talked earlier today about programmability and intelligent benefit. So today here at MP, I'm happy to announce that we are also launching a merchant partner program that will enable merchants to take advantage and to connect with consumers through premium experience, programmability, and that's really exciting. So please come and join us later on at the Visa launch. We'd love to talk more about the merchant partner program. All right, it's already time to wrap. Couple of words. Programmable commerce will not emerge from a single solution or from a single company. It depends on how we move together as an ecosystem. For everyone in the room, the invitation is clear. Lean into this future with us. I think we would agree that programmability is where payments are heading. Now, when this new mind, is so intelligently gifted, the question and the opportunity is, how do we design for a future that keeps up? Thank you very much.
Mathieu, for giving us a glimpse into the future. So, and now we welcome Marco Conte, founder at Congrify, an XOPay company. So Marco will now show us how you abstract payment complexity as a business scales without completely losing your grip on cost or control. Welcome, Marco. Let's give him a big round of applause. Stage is yours.
Thank you. Mathieu, great presentation, and thank you for announcing some new updates from Visa. Before coming to MP, I had a joke with my marketing manager saying that maybe we will have to update slides a few times, considering all the new protocols and new announcements. We did it only last week, so it didn't go that bad. So I'm going to talk about payment complexity. We are talking today about agentic commerce. It's adding another layer of complexity on the payment stack, which is going to affect everything. So I'm going to do one step back, talk about how this affects what we have today, and then look at what we're discussing with merchants and what you're feeling from the market. So my name is Marco Conte, and I joined XOPay in October after founding Congrify, which was a data and payments intelligence company. All right. To start, let's grab your phones to get an idea of the audience who is here, and to get some movements on your arms. So please answer on slides. How do you define yourself? If you're a merchant, if you're a solution provider. It's always interesting, I think, to see who is attending those sessions. And we see merchants. Obviously, we are at MPE, right? So the expectation is to have many merchants, but more than half. Interesting. Some PSPs, some fintechs. Yeah, it's a merchant audience today. Really, really good. I think we can give it another 10 seconds. I'm going to have another poll later. So I think today, during the presentations, you will have the opportunity to go to Slido a few times. Thank you for answering. So next, why do I start a picture at a keynote with a picture of an ice cream? Besides loving ice cream and loving vanilla, this brings me back to 8 years ago, where for the first time I read the concept of vanilla transaction. What is a vanilla transaction? It's a simple one-time payment that happens without any additional complications, any additional complexity. So let's say no partial authorizations, no partial captures, no recurring transactions, no card on file, nothing or nothing. So this is the most basic transaction that you have in payments. But how many of those transactions we actually have today? And how many are going to have in the future looking at agentic commerce and similar? Not so many. So payments are hard. The scenario where you have a vanilla transaction, right? The ice cream transaction, it's, I don't say rare, but it's not the majority. So payments are really hard. They are complex. It takes a lot of time to implement payment methods, to implement payment service providers. So merchants say from 3 to 6 to 9 months to implement a payment service provider. And this is part, obviously, of a critical infrastructure. You have revenue to consider, you have a lot of risk, the reputation of the merchant. So it's really a complicated reality. Payments are complicated. And with agentic commerce, we are adding even an additional layer of complication on what we call the complexity curve. So now imagine, like, any merchant, you start, day one, what's your problem? You want to accept payments. You go to a payment service provider, you get a contract, you start, you expand globally, and then at a certain point, the business gets complicated. You get into many different regions, you add multiple payment service provider. So the complexity curve goes very high, and that's the moment where you need to start thinking about building a payment infrastructure that should be built for flexibility and scalability. And the question today is, how do you prepare for an infrastructure that is changing drastically? Checkouts are changing. The payment rails are changing. So the question for 2026 is, how do we prepare for this? And from my point of view, like, this goes around 4 pillars that are going to be affected by AI and agentic commerce. First, tokenization. So tokenization is an old concept in payments. You need to tokenize your cards. But as you saw from Mathieu's presentation from Visa, the tokenization rail is being used now to allow agents and tokens which are coming from them. So this is going to change. And having control and understanding of tokenization is fundamental. So that's the first pillar which is being affected. Second one is payment orchestration. So payment orchestration now is changing. And it doesn't matter if you do payment orchestration with an external provider or in-house. The concept is going to change. We have already 6 protocols, or we will have more in the future, that are going to affect the way that anyone orchestrates payments. So this is the second pillar that is going to be affected by agentic commerce. Third one, and here there are a lot of unanswered questions, risk and compliance. So the risk is changing. The relationship with the customer is going to change with agentic transactions. The data are going to change. Fraud solution providers are updating their models already because they don't see certain information. Compliance. Customers, by completing a transaction on a space outside of the checkout, might not even read the terms and conditions as they read it today. So how do we ensure that, like, things are running smoothly as of today? Third pillar affected. The fourth, which is close to my heart, is data and payments intelligence. Obviously, the data are going to be so different. There is going to be intent validation. There is going to be different types of reconciliation between what an agent was mandated and instructed to do versus what actually happened. So this is the fourth one. And I'm going to deep dive here a little bit on the data intelligence topic, because data intelligence today, it's a bit like climbing a mountain. So it's easy to build the foundations, but going to the top gets gets quite complicated. So the last, 500 meters might be the big struggle. And this is going to affect agentic commerce. It's going to affect everything as well, because like companies very often have a data problem. When it comes to agentic commerce, this is going as well in a different direction before even the payments. Product catalogs. Our merchants, our e-commerces today updating the product catalogs to make sure that AI searches and AI agents can get the right information. That's a really big question. But when it comes to payments, we see performance optimization, how you're going to optimize your transaction in an agentic commerce environment, how you're going to understand the cost as well, because costs are going to change with agentic commerce, and how you're going to ensure that operationally you can handle all of this. And teams have knowledge to understand how to differentiate a case where traditional transaction is coming in versus an agentic commerce. And why this topic is so complex? Collecting data, it's hard. It's an effort that you need to have from data engineering teams, from software engineers, from people, involving people that have understanding of payments. Cost structures in the payments industry are very complex. So I'll leave it here without comments on this. And then there are intelligence challenges. Now, in an environment where agentic commerce is going to be there this year or next year or over the upcoming years, are you ensuring that you have data science resources in your teams to update anything that is related to your data setups? And those are complex to manage, obviously, because you have a lot of data sources, you have a lot of different payment service providers. Usually, those are data sources from the most common PSPs or payment methods. Imagine here now if you have to add OpenAI or Gemini or Perplexity or all the others. So how do we ensure that those additional data sets are coming in? You've got to build it, or you can buy it, obviously. There is this, when I discuss with people that come and say, no worries, we don't have to build anything. AI is going to save us when it comes to data. And I'm like, are you sure that AI is going to solve all your data issues? LLMs today are not ready and are not powerful enough to do data analysis. They hallucinate. A few days ago, a friend of mine actually told me about to read really nice research where 10 of the best universities globally confirm that LLMs on average hallucinates on around 18% of the cases. So do you want to have LLMs with an 18% hallucination rate analyzing your data and solving your data issues? I doubt. Then there is the second part, garbage in, garbage out. So if the data that you put in an LLM or an AI or anything is bad, well, the result is going to be bad, right? So data quality is fundamental. And data quality is going to be fundamental as well in agentic commerce. So you need to make sure, from a product catalog perspective, data are good. From the new chain of intent validation, of understanding what customers are doing, what the agents are doing, the data are streamlined and collected. Otherwise, it's going to be quite hard. Optimal stack, from our point of view, for anything you do around payments, anomaly detection, which is data science, is not LLMs, AI recommendations, having agents that can actually read the outputs of your data science and machine learning models. And then third is going into agentic operations in payments. So AI in payments is not only agentic commerce, it's let's use AI internally to optimize and become efficient, to save money, to generate new revenues, to optimize what is being done today. And I started building that on the anomaly detection side. So the dream that I had in payments was to wake up in the morning, open my laptop, and see all the things that my machine learning models are spotting to trigger anomalies. And we did that, and now we are moving into agentic part. I do have a poll here to ask you, considering that 60% of the merchants are here, 60% of the audience is from merchants, how do you describe today your level of data operations? Because when it comes to AI and agentic commerce, I think this is a big question that we need to ask ourselves to get ready for that. Because if today the data are not managed in the right way, how you're preparing for tomorrow when the payment volumes are going to change drastically and your customers are going to behave in completely different ways. It's very interesting. I think I asked the same question 3 weeks ago in San Diego, California, at a payments conference, and the second answer, spreadsheet-driven, was the first answer with 59% of votes, which was quite impressive. So I'm happy to see that here in Berlin, in Europe, we are much more advanced with centralized, unified data warehouses, which is encouraging because this makes companies ready for what's going to happen later. So I invite the ones that are relying on spreadsheets to revisit that internally and discuss with their teams. So now agentic commerce. So you want it or not, agentic commerce is here. And I'm super excited about that because this is something tremendously big in payments. I don't know if we had anything so big in the last 10 years or 15 years. And even if we don't feel it today, this is going to happen. It's going to happen very fast. A few weeks ago, one of the schemes announced the first agentic transaction in Europe. We would have never thought about that a few years ago. So it is coming. It is there. But this brings some questions. So as a merchant, as a player in the ecosystem, how do we verify agent identity? So now there are some initial protocols which are trying to answer to this question. So it's going to be very, very important, right? The risk and compliance part. Now it's going to be a know your agent part. How do we confirm that the agent is actually doing what is mandated to do? It's another very big question. So how do we confirm the agent permissions? The agent is trying to buy red shoes and he buys blue shoes, right? So how do we confirm that? And agent fraud. So it's going to be quite harder to understand when an agent is fraudulent versus mandated regularly. Because we are going to lose some data points that today in fraud prevention are super important. Biometrics, for example, biometric behavior. We are not going to see that anymore. And those are the key questions that we see in companies. So from one of the surveys that we have analyzed, 87% of CTOs that are working in payments consider that trust is going to be the most important factor in agentic commerce. Which brings us to say that trust is going to be the new currency of e-commerce or agentic commerce. Without an enhanced level of trust, customers are not going to trust their agents. Companies are not going to trust accepting agentic payments. And all the chain is not going to enable this. So this is a fundamental piece, more as ever. And if we look at how this is going to work, right? You know, we all play with GPTs, with AI chats, but what's going to happen behind? This is, for me, the new checkout. The checkout is going to disappear, or vastly disappear. And then it's a question of having this in AI searches, or having this on merchant websites or merchant apps. But this is the new reality. And the new reality requires intent validation, requires a risk trust scoring, which is going to change, like an agent score, then orchestration on protocols, deciding which protocols to use, and then the verification and collection of the data. So we expect this to be the new normal, new checkout. But where are we today? So we believe that there are 4 steps. The first part is the AI recommends. Now, how many people have tried to use ChatGPT to search something, products, flights? I tried to book all my flights with ChatGPT. Well, still doesn't work for me. Hopefully one day they will recommend me the right things. But we all tried that. Now we are on the second step, where the AI is trying to initiating something. So the AI is trying to bring us to the checkouts, but we are the ones finalizing it. For non-readiness in the markets or for trust issues, we are on that phase. Now the question is, are we going to get to step 3, where the AI is going to transact on our behalf? Is it going to be a 100% AI transacts for us? Or is it going to be more like for certain things AI is going to transact for us, for certain things we are going to transact on and finalizing the purchase? So it's going to be very interesting in 1 or 2 years when we are going to meet again here at MP, maybe on this stage, maybe somewhere else, if we are going to be still on phase 2, phase 3, or the phases are going to change. Because everything can change as we see right now. Merchants obviously are facing the new challenges that I was mentioning before. The first one obviously is how to enable those protocols and what to do there. So I mentioned the product catalog. I think that's the step number 1 for everyone, making sure that your data are in order to be used by by AI searches or internal or external, it doesn't really matter. And then how do you enable those protocols in the markets? The second part is cost and operations. Your operations need to get ready for this. Chargeback management, for example, it's a very big question of how it's going to change, right? Your customer is going to come in a different channel. Maybe at a certain point, they will not even know they're buying something from you. They're going to feel that they're buying something from somewhere else. So how do you manage that? And third, I think this is quite underestimated, is branding and loyalty. The relationship with the customer, the access to the customer communication is going to change. So today, merchants, they want to upsell in a checkout. Imagine in the travel industry, where you want to add insurance services or other things. But when the checkout is somewhere else, how do you do that? Now, in some protocols, there are some parts that can be used for that. In some, this is completely inexistent. That's a very big question for merchants today. And this is the slide, which I was afraid to update before coming here, because we had to add the sixth part. We are already in an ecosystem of different protocols. And talking with different people in the industry, the conversation is that this is a work in progress, right? You know, it's moving very fast, and probably 80% of what we have here is not gonna be relevant in 1 year. But we need to stay up to date. We need to know where we are going. And I think especially the last one with the verifiable intent is a really important piece that was missing. So stay tuned on this. But at the end of the day, what is agentic commerce? It's simply another layer on the payment stack. And if you look at this is going to be on top, right? So this is basically replacing the checkout. The customer relationship is changing. The customers are basically coming from there. So the conversational layer is going to change. Customers are going to come in a different way. Then we are adding on that the trust layer, the intent layer. How do we verify the agents? And the third part is payments as usual. So payments are complex, but this is still payments as usual. And we are adding on top new parts. And as I said, the first part is on the conversational layer. It's my personal belief that this is going to replace the checkouts. So checkouts, as we see today, are something that are not going to exist anymore. And as I showed this before, I really believe that it's going to be the new way to interact for the majority of checkouts. This is going to be the new standard, different colors, different UIs, different things, but the concept is going to be this one for the future. The trust layer is going to be fundamental. We need to validate identity, intent, the consent, what has actually been mandated to an agent. And this brings the question to how companies are going to do this. Are they going to orchestrate internally? Are they going to orchestrate externally? All those different protocols. This is the question that people need to evaluate internally. And the last piece is data, right? So we need to collect different data for visibility, monitoring, understanding what is happening. So if your data today are not in a good shape, they're going to be even in a worse shape in the future. If today you are in a good place, you got to do some work to just make sure that you can keep that up. To close, how are merchants preparing today? Product catalogs, preparing for different protocols. Those are questions that are very common. And I invite you to look at the 6 questions that we put here and bring those back home to your teams to see where you are in this journey. I appreciate the attention. Thank you very much. And if you want to download the presentation, you have here a QR code. I invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn, ask any question, provide any feedback, and we are open for any conversation here on the floor at our booth. So enjoy the panel that is coming right now. Great conversation, and I wish you a nice rest of the day. Thank you.
Now it's time for our big talk session and our panel. So agentic commerce and payments, is this the next commerce frontier? So now we've just heard from Mathieu at Visa earlier on how the programmable world changes the way we buy, sell, and move money. And just now from Marco on what it takes to abstract all that growing complexity without actually losing control. And it's interesting because we were here last year and we were talking about certainly identity and consent, and now we've got this new layer, which is intent, which has started to emerge in the last 6 months or so. So have I got a stellar panel for you today? So I would like to ask Marco back on stage, and then welcome Julius Danek, Head of Product at Stripe, Niklas Hasheim, GTM at OpenAI, Eddie Onaga, VP Growth Products and Partnerships at Visa, and Ashley Paulus, VP Revenue at Checkout.com. Let's give them all a big round of applause. I'm really excited about this panel. So, first of all, we'll start the session with something that lots of people talk about, which is bots, buying from bots. That's kind of a very exciting question to explore. And what we'd like to see is what's actually real and what is just slideware. And I'd like to first start with Eddie at Visa. So before we get lost in all the buzzwords, can you give us a couple of concrete example where Visa is seeing real transactions today?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. The futurist in me would love to see a world with a bunch of bot-to-bot transactions, and that's certainly how we've built Visa Intelligent Commerce in mind for that future kind of end state. But I think the reality today is that you're seeing much more man-in-the-middle type transactions happening. This could be a case, I think there's a saying called Amara's Law, where we overestimate the impact of technological innovation in the short term, we underestimate in the long term, and bot-to-bot is not quite here just yet. Consumers are not necessarily comfortable giving up that control and autonomy to bots making discovery and purchase all on their own without consumer intervention. So the examples that we see today have human involvement. There's a few that are live now. Amazon Buy For Me, for example, has launched in the US. We're seeing transaction volumes coming through that. It's a very exciting use case. But definitely in the short term, we see people playing a role before transactions are completed.
So still human in the loop, obviously. So I'd now like to move on to Ashley at Checkout. So where are you actually adapting your platform, routing risk models for agent-driven commerce right now? And what is still, on the slides?
Yeah, good question. Thank you for having me. So we believe that PSPs have always kind of had an agnostic position across all of the payment rails, whether that's an integration to Visa, MasterCard, APMs, open banking. It's our role to really provide the rails to merchants and then allow them to choose which they want to process on and what best suits their revenue strategies. We've adopted that same strategy when it comes to agentic. Instead of really closely aligning with one specific protocol, our idea is that you can use your connection into Checkout and access all of the different MLMs. It's our role to be deeply embedded into all of those. What does that mean in principle, and how are merchants using that today? We have live test transactions that are running through with OpenAI, our partnership there. We also have pilots that are live and running in the US, and then early stage pilots in the UK and Europe. In our markets, it looks a lot different. There's a lot more regulatory hurdles that we need to get through, but transparently, we're okay to let the Americans go first, and then we figure it out from there.
Absolutely. So let's hear from another platform, and moving on to Julius. So from your vantage point at Stripe, where are you already seeing agents behave as genuine new channels in live flows?
Yeah. I kind of want to start this with an audience question. Marco, you kind of nicely teed it up. You said that you started using all the different agents to make purchasing decisions. Can we get a raise of hands for everyone that used an agent to inform a purchasing or buying decision in the last month or two?
Raising my hands.
Wow. So I guess that's like 60, 70%. So you can already see that this channel that we're talking about, it's a concrete reality today. And kind of piggybacking onto what Ashley said, the Americans are first at Stripe too. And so in the US, we are seeing live transactions. We are seeing transactions powered by the agentic commerce protocol, for example, that we built together with OpenAI. And while the amount of transactions running through those channels are still small, what is obvious is that product discovery is becoming a huge new challenge with agents that merchants need to confront today. And when you start confronting those product discovery challenges, at the same time, you will start thinking about how you're going to do the transactions through agents. And I'll give you a little very interesting insight from another world, right? It's like when we're talking, MPEs mostly concerns itself with merchants that are selling physical products. Stripe and other PSPs, we're engaged in selling software products, and we can see that agents are making software purchases on behalf of users today already. Like a lot of our integrations at Stripe are now being written by agents, as you can imagine, and so there is already a concrete product surface that we're selling our products on. And we imagine that for consumers, it's not going to be different in the next 3 to 5 years. So.
Excellent. So, so we already have, by all accounts, software agents that are essentially quietly running around the rails in the background, moving some real money. And that actually brings us to our next question. So when we move on, and maybe bots will be buying from other bots as this ecosystem evolves, and raising the point that Marco was making earlier on in his keynote, who do we actually trust? Because trust is going to be very important in this evolving ecosystem. So, so it's probably time we heard from the people that are actually building some of those agents. So, for those who know me, you know I'm a stickler for governance and security and fraud prevention. So. Looking at the whole concept of know your agent, shadow agents running in the background, and all of those things. So, Niklas at OpenAI, if KYC was yesterday and KYA is actually today, what has to be true before you let an agent act on a user's behalf in commerce in general?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we all agree that agents are already here. So there's, of course, maybe a little bit a delay of when agents really transact, and we see that actually already taking place, either via some of our ACP protocol partners or even in browser. So we have in ChatGPT and Atlas browser where you can also action transactions already. But when we need to figure out really how to scale this, I think it's really important to also understand what is the architecture behind. So maybe a very brief overview how agents actually work so that we all have a common understanding. So an agent is normally not a single agent, but really with a couple of sub-agents. So an agent has a reasoning logic, it has triaging to other agent in a retail sector, for example. We have an agent which is maybe customer support, and we have a product recommendation agent. Some agent maybe looks after what is the inventory. And each of those agents then have different capabilities, guardrails, and functions. So a capability can be tool use, so bringing in other applications. It could be web search, so doing recommendation or searching. And it can be also computer use. This is when a computer can transact on your behalf or also do some file search within your computer. And you hear already, you have multiple agents, multiple capabilities, multiple guardrails. So one thing is really important, or actually these are 3 things. So it's first of all, when you build those overarching agents, it's identity. All of those 6 agents, I need to know which agent is doing what and what is responsible for. The next one is authority, exactly what is he responsible for, or he or she or it, the agent. So meaning, does the transaction agent should be also having the same rights as maybe the research agent or the recommendation agent. And lastly, this is very important, is then the governance. So making sure that each of those agents, you log what each agent does, so you really understand if something goes not as it should be, that you can really adapt and make the changes. And this is really where shadow agents coming in, is where we see that maybe some of the customers just building one agent, say like, hey, you do everything. You give the recommendation, you do the transaction, you go through our assortment, you do the return, you do customer support. And this is then really where the governance, the identity, and the authority misses. And this is what we normally, when we work with customers directly on building maybe their agents within their merchant system or within their website, it's really making sure that this is all being taken care of. Identity, authority, and governance, really important. So exactly what you like, I think, Nira.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we heard from Matthew earlier on in his keynote about the evolving Visa stack. So Eddie, I'd like to go back to you now from a network point of view. What does trusted actually mean in agentic commerce? So what do you need as minimal signals?
Thank you. I think it's interesting because Visa's built its reputation, its entire brand promise on trust. And if you think of card-based payments, there's kind of two key parts to a transaction. Are you who you say you are? And are you allowed to do what you want to do? Are you allowed to make that purchase? Are you authorized for that transaction? And as we move into this agentic world, it's extending that to agents, right? So is the agent who they say they are? Are they allowed to do what they want to do? And what is it they want to do? Who authorized them to make that transaction? And is the entire chain auditable? So essentially, same thing my colleague from OpenAI just mentioned, right? And excuse me. In practice, this means that for the Visa Intelligent Commerce program, we have an agent registration process. So for an agent to interact within our systems, they have to onboard properly. You can think of this as analogous to how we onboarded token requesters and mobile payment providers. You know, there's a set of rules that they need to follow, a set of data that they need to provide. And at the end of the day, we're able to identify those agents within our systems and audit their performance, fraud rates, et cetera, to hold them accountable kind of end to end. One big gap that we realized we had was that just takes a look at an agent's trust level within the Visa network. And oftentimes what happens is before an agent interacts with a merchant to make that purchase, that merchant needs to know whether they can trust that agent. You know, for the last 2 decades, merchants have been trained to screen for bots and malicious behavior, and you have CDNs like Cloudflare or Akamai that might block weird behavior coming in, and these agents might not even be able to interact with the merchant's checkout screen. And so one of the announcements we made last fall in conjunction with Cloudflare was around this trusted agent protocol, where agents can provide their information directly to the merchants through existing rails so that the merchants know to let these agents in. And so that's kind of extending this concept of who is the agent, and then allowing that to extend beyond just the typical Visa ecosystem of working with issuers and acquirers.
Absolutely. So slightly moving up the stack and going to you, Ashley. So once agents are in the flow, which is kind of inevitable, how does who the agent is change your view of risk, fraud? And we heard Marco earlier on talk about chargebacks, which becomes kind of a whole new dimension, isn't it? So where do you see that going, and what you're doing?
Yeah, so what I really enjoyed about Matthew's presentation was that he spoke a lot about passkeys, about network tokenization. All of these are things that have existed within payments ecosystems for a long time. And to just touch on what Eddie was saying, these are evolving things. So just because something is AI or agentic doesn't necessarily mean it's net new. There's a lot of technology that already exists that we're leveraging today. We believe that today, with the agentic flows that we're seeing, it really is, the responsibility of the schemes to make sure that that protocol and regulatory framework exists, so that merchants and customers and PSPs know who's responsible for fraud and chargebacks, who's responsible for the consent at every stage of the transaction. I think the interesting question that we have in this region, and that's currently evolving, is once it goes beyond schemes have historically been able to build these frameworks with issuers really quickly, really robustly. They've been doing it for decades. But once it moves into alternative payment methods that are localized in Europe, in Asia, in LATAM, then that's going to ask a much broader question around regulatory frameworks and what will this look like. That's obviously a phase 2. We need to get to phase 1. We're still in phase 0. But right now, from a card protocol perspective, we're quite confident that the schemes are building frameworks that everyone will know how to interact within.
And you're absolutely right. It's an important distinction to make is that we have the card network infrastructure who have been used to doing these things for a very, very long time. And then you get, as you say, alternative and local or even A2A rails. And how do you actually deal with that? And at the minute, the regulators had to step in to look at APP fraud and all of those things, which is going to be an interesting evolution. So Julius, back to you for this one. So when you overlay KYA essentially on the Stripe platform, so what extra signals can merchant and PSP really need, and what must they have?
I kind of want to pick up on a point that Ashley just made. Especially in Europe and regions outside of the US or the Anglo-Saxon countries, you are seeing a plethora and explosion of LPMs, or alternative payment methods, local payment methods, potato, potato, same thing. The point here being is that consumers have certain payment preferences, and we have to make sure that we honor those consumer preferences. And we're actively working with a lot of the local payment methods to develop tokens that are processor agnostic, so you could process them with checkout.com, for example. They're called shared payment tokens, but that would encapsulate any local payment method transaction into a token as well, because a lot of these local schemes typically tend to optimize for human-in-the-loop transactions. And so it's still, the reality is that a lot of the agentic commerce transactions are still going to be human-in-the-loop for the foreseeable future, especially if you think about something like 3DS in Europe. How are you going to action that for agentic commerce? But you have to prepare for a future where there are autonomous transactions being done by agents to other agents without a human in the loop. And so for that, in the shared payment tokens, we add explicit limits, like, for example, you authorize a token only for this specific merchant for this specific product, or up to a certain amount, right? Like, you can spend $300 this month. And that also opens up the way for new payment methods, by the way, one of which is perfectly shaped for these types of transactions, crypto wallets, because you can spin up crypto wallets for each use case if you want to and sort of hand it over to an agent. But these are really, we're talking about, I think, 5 to 10 year timeframes for some of these innovations. But the work is ongoing in the back end, and I think it's really fascinating. And I actually want to make another point that, Eddie, you brought up with Cloudflare. So one of the concrete tips that we're giving merchants today in order to optimize for agentic commerce is bots or agents have super different purchasing behaviors. A bot going on your website is not going to browse all the goods that you have and then maybe look at one and then navigate to another one 10 seconds later. They access like 50 to 100 to 200 of them at the same time, trying to like figure out, okay, there's like these 200 t-shirts. The user that I'm working with, they run a black t-shirt, so let's find all the black t-shirts. And so many merchant websites today are just going to mark that as malicious and completely block transactions or even block the agent from browsing. And so you want to make sure that you're set up to receive these types of transactions. And there's, I think, explicit browser headers that identify these agents. So you can look all of that stuff up, obviously. But that's a concrete advice I would have following on what you said, Eddie. Right?
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely the case, yes.
So if we fast forward 10 years and we now have we know who the agent is, and we know what it's allowed to do for you, and all of those good things. So the obvious next question, and certainly for merchants, is who actually owns the relationship when the agent is actually the one doing the shopping, which actually brings us to our next question about delegated shopping and loyalty, which I'm sure will interest many merchants in the room. So going back to you, Julius, from your infrastructure, not interface vantage point, when the agent does the buying, who really owns the customer?
So just to correct that, so Stripe is infrastructure and interface. We provide a large amount of checkout components, and I'll talk about that in detail tomorrow. I highly recommend attending.
Oh, he's great.
I am, this stage. From our vantage point, and I mean, Nicholas, I'd be very curious to hear your opinion after. The merchants very much own the consumer relationships. I have a hard time imagining that a company like OpenAI or Anthropic wants to deal with warehouse management, logistics, refunds, consumer complaints about broken electronics. I'm pretty sure like all of the nitty-gritty of actually fulfilling transactions will still rest with the merchants. I mean, Google, for example, didn't completely take over every single customer relationships, but they simply provided a new distribution channel. And so that's how I see agentic commerce evolving as well. And I, by the way, don't think that every checkout in the future is going to be through conversation. I think we do go window shopping. When we go to a store, most of us don't actually want to talk to the clerk to get sold something, right? We want to walk around and check out the things that we like, touch the goods. That's still going to exist. Like, you're still going to have feeds. Some of these feeds might be displayed through agents, right? More customized, but I think not every single purchasing decision is going to be a conversation. And so that kind of leads me to another more personal pet theory that I have on this, which is right now brands are. There's always, when you're thinking about how marketing budgets are being split by merchants, a certain portion goes into performance marketing and a certain portion goes into brand marketing. And typically, I think in the last 20 years or so, the weight has shifted more to performance marketing, so really targeted advertising. I think that we're going to see a resurgence of brand marketing because the way that agents discover products, I think, is going to be much more driven by telling a good story about your brand, making sure that it's represented well, making sure that consumers are able to give explicit instructions to purchase for a certain brand in their queries or prompts to agents, right? Buy my Pampers is a current prompt that I have at home. And so I think we're going to see an explosion in out-of-home that's going to be quite out-of-home and branding, more branding marketing budgets is going to be interesting.
And that's an interesting angle, absolutely, brand marketing, the resurgence thereof. So going to you, Marco, from the orchestration layer, what does your data actually reveal about where agent-driven demand is coming from, and how can merchants use that to avoid being commoditized? I mean, we've heard Julius talking about brand marketing, but you may have another angle.
Yeah, so, I mean, the question, what you were saying about checkouts and everything, I agree. I think that not everything will be a conversational checkout, that's for sure, but there is going to be a considerable portion that is going to become like that. And then, as you're asking on the merchant side, I think it's very important to recognize and differentiate all of this. So you were mentioning about the headers. Actually, you can see based on the header, which agents, which AI search is coming in, and that's it. Basically, I was having a discussion with a very well-known person. It was is a CTO of a very well-known fraud provider in the US. For a solution provider, and he was mentioning how they're adapting their models to actually recognize the agents, and they're considering that as a new type of behavior. And the signals they can get are okay, but then is the question, what you were saying about the bots, for example, is completely true. So many things are going to change, and we are educating merchants to let them understand that they need to see things from a different angle. They need to be ready for that, because sure, innovation might, let's say, be widely spread in 5 to 10 years, but innovation is happening today already. Yeah. And you have first movers, which are usually in Silicon Valley, but, well, in Europe, it's not that we are sleeping on it. It's, people are moving, and there are some companies that are moving faster than others. So everybody needs to have a strategy. Everybody needs to be ready. then the question is, do you want to pilot it now? Do you want to wait another year to pilot? That's a different thing. But I would be surprised if there is no boardroom or strategic meeting about any company or any e-commerce where people are not asking those questions. Because if they're not, well, that's a problem. So what I'm saying to people is, at least try to understand what you're gonna get and how you're gonna react from the different angles in your company. Because it might be 50% of e-commerce in 10 years, it might be 5%, doesn't matter, but you gotta be ready today for that day.
I do want to answer to this because this is very interesting, all of this stuff. So what we're seeing in software, I think, is something that's going to play out in retail as well. What we're seeing in software is you're going to start having headless commerce. So headless commerce is you don't need human readable websites. You have agents actually just making decisions based on APIs, right? So I think we're going to see some super interesting, and I think this is going to happen more on long tail commerce initially, just stores that don't even have websites, that just maybe sell white t-shirts through APIs. And you're going to go in the agent and just say, hey, buy me a white t-shirt. And it's not going to come from like a huge brand. It might come from a headless shop. Right? And so I think that's super interesting because it's a totally different model of selling. You don't sell to consumers anymore. You sell to bots. You sell to machines. How do you optimize for that? And these are questions that are going to be answered over the next couple of years. I don't think everyone now needs to build a headless shop, but you need to start thinking about it today. And I don't know, it's just a really, we're seeing this in software today, right? A lot of Stripe is being built now by headless agents. They're not going on our website and shopping around. There's just Cloud Code doing it or Codex.
And that's absolutely right. And I'd like to bring Niklas in on that point from the agent builder side. So if AI becomes the front door, as Julius was just intimating, front door to product discovery, how do merchants stop being or stay visible, essentially?
Yeah, and I think this is a lot of also what Julius and the other panelists already said. I think a merchant has to do both at the moment, really being ready what is coming. Maybe this is in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, likely earlier than expected, but you have to be really prepared for the agentic commerce, for the checkout, and so on and so forth. But then again, I think the big mistake, what I personally saw when working with some of the leading retailers, they maybe were too focused on, I want to be ready for agentic commerce, I have everything needed to pick it up, but then they forget the basics. And the basics is, you have to have a discoverable, easy process and product. You would be surprised what you just said, that some of the retailers, block some malicious activity, which turns out to be agents. So we have a shopping research agent, which we launched prior to Christmas last year. And this is exactly how it works. So it goes into the retailer, into the merchant, and goes through 200 articles at once. And then you really want to make sure that your website is crawlable and visible. So really the basics has to be there. So this is also what we saw in the last couple of months. Based on the experience of users, is really where ChatGPT stands out. I'm first talking about ChatGPT and then what we help customers and merchants to build their own agent within their website. But within ChatGPT, really the strength is that ChatGPT knows you like probably no other product knows you as well. It has access to the web. It knows different retailers, and it can do a lot of things for you really intelligently. So what you want to make sure is that you have really your merchant feeds ready, you have your products ready, and you have your metadata ready, and you also optimize your website, and this could be a headless website in some months, but really optimize it for giving it as much information as possible from an LLM perspective, so that it then can give you as the end user the best answer. So it really comes back to then what can a merchant do today? So I think, again, really being aware of where the technology is heading, but really making sure the basics are there. And the basics are within ChatGPT, when a user search, making sure your merchant feed is ready, your products are visible, you allow crawling of your website, all those basics. Then the second layer is we launched apps in ChatGPT a couple of months ago, and this is more a branded experience for merchants and for any company. This can be a marketplace, this can be a merchant, where you have a door within ChatGPT to an end user, but you still have your branded experience. This can be also within a checkout within this experience, or a click-through then to your website. And the last layer, and this is also what I'm working with customers every day, is making sure that you're, as a merchant, when you have a website and you have a shopping assistant or an agent on your website, the first comparison your end user, your customer makes is, what can this chatbot do against ChatGPT or another agent which I use daily? And if this is not on par, then either the end user goes back to ChatGPT or it goes to a customer or a merchant who has a better shopping assistant available. So really making sure the capabilities of your shopping assistant in your website or your merchant assistant is really capable and making use of what the technology is today. So this is normally the 3 points I go into conversation with merchants.
And it's a fascinating topic. I'd like to bring you in, Ashley.
I have a contrarian opinion.
Ooh, please do.
Great.
So we are partners, we are friends, but there is a reason why Amazon is suing Perplexity today. In 2025, Amazon did $70 billion in ad revenue. In 2024, they did $40 billion. Eyeballs on websites mean something. And I have the pleasure of speaking to merchants every single day. It's the best part of my day. And speaking specifically about their revenue, that's the most important thing for these merchants. And some of them have ad revenue that's really important, and they're not interested in outsourcing that to an MLM. But all of them, retail merchants, software merchants, anyone who's selling products, whether they're physical goods or not, spends a lot of time and a lot of money making sure that eyeballs are on their websites and that eyeballs are the ones that are making purchases and influencing those purchases. And there's a significant amount of revenue and basket size that wouldn't be captured if you're outsourcing that to a third party. Now, there is some really great stuff that's happening with Gemini, with OpenAI, and they're trying to allow merchants to still have that native experience. But what I'm hearing from merchants over the last few days and then over the last few months is around data sovereignty. And there's a rising resistance from all of our large enterprise clients that are saying, this is our data, this is our customer's journey, and we want to own this as much as possible. So I do agree that a phase one is making sure that you have whatever the agentic experience is going to be for your website, whether that's recommendations, whether that's a warehouse of SKUs that you're exposing via different protocols. We're seeing with some retail merchants, just anecdotally, their agentic also includes like virtual try-ons, and there's different layers that you can do that are going to be best fit based on your customers. But I know that there's a lot of hesitance, especially with the very large players, that they're going to give up all of this to third parties, that their websites would potentially become headless overall, right? You don't want to be just a list of SKUs and a warehouse distribution.
But maybe I want to add something there. I think there is going to be 2 things there. One, competition between agents, and like traditional commerce. But this is going to affect certain industries. So anything that, it's more branded driven, let's say the fashion industry, those brands are going to be reluctant on being just compared to like, anyone else just driven by price or some other stuff. But industries which are going to be less brand driven, like marketplaces or like comparison portals, are going to be happy to increase their exposure on those searches. So it's going to be very interesting to see like how there's going to be a fight at the end of the day of some companies not wanting to be there, and then what are you going to guys do, right? When you're going to see that they are not exposing the data or on purpose, so like how you're going to find them and still like give the information to your customers, and companies which are going to be completely on the other side be like, please, add me, please give me visibility. So I think that's going to be the challenge.
It's interesting as well from like a worldview perspective and an emerging markets perspective, because does this create a more democratized competition, right? If it's no longer about the brand power that you would yield, and that's also a lot based on the market that you're coming from, but now if it's the information that you're providing, does it create more of an even playing field? I don't have an answer. It's just an interesting point to add on there.
Yeah, just one thing I want to add is, at the end of the day, the end user decides. So you can't say, I want to be the merchant who doesn't want to, play with Gemini or ChatGPT, and I'm going to stay out. And if everybody else or some merchant do it, and they have a large assortment, and the user is pushing for this and prefers that, then this merchant going to win. But what we see at least is there's discoverability, exploration is, a lot of things happen with an LLM, but then really the brand experience still is very important, that we see users and want to go to the brand they're familiar with, want to do the checkout at the website and rather visit this. If this is going to be the future, let's talk again in a couple of years, but I think at the end, it's really the user who decides how it's going to be.
Very
unless you're
interesting.
Amazon. Yeah.
No, I mean, that's great. I want to come back to you, Ashley, on that point, which is, with all of this evolving, how do you see merchant PSP relationships evolve and all those good operational things we're all used to, such as SLAs and so on and so forth? I mean, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think from an SLA perspective, we're going to be compliant to whatever reality eventually evolves, right? For those of us in the audience that are old enough to remember, there used to be no online shopping, so it was only brick and mortar retail. And then online evolved, and different merchants decided if they were going to have an online only and e-commerce only strategy, if they were going to have both. I think that this is just creating more of that omni strategy against payments. So really complementary to what Julius was saying earlier. I think from a compliance and Nestlé perspective, as I mentioned before, our role is really to just ensure that whatever the regulatory relationship is, whatever the protocol relationship is, we are acting on behalf of the merchant and ensuring that there's adherence and compliance. Just like we are fully compliant to Visa, MasterCard, Amex, Discover, all of the different card rails, it will be the same for Agentic. Between April and October of last year, 6 different protocols were launched. It's going to be impossible for even the largest, most sophisticated merchant to adhere to all of the different requirements, all of the different SLAs for all of those protocols. So that's our role, to make sure that merchants are getting the best experience for their businesses and their customers.
So yes, fascinating, and when we look at all of this again, we can see it's becoming increasingly more complex, and there are so many things that merchants need to think about. So we still want to cover one last question before our final question, as we're running out of time, and it's about abstracting complexity. And I'd like to go to Eddie on that one, because more and more decisions are becoming programmable, even though right now there's still human in the loop for the foreseeable future. So what principles does Visa focus on to make sure abstraction doesn't come at the expense of transparency, consumer consent, or ecosystem trust? Because that's what you're about as a network.
Yeah, thank you. I think you hit the nail on the head with the question itself. So from a Visa perspective, the human being the accountable party is critical. They are the ones that are making the decision. The agent is being delegated and making the human's life easier, but at the end of the day, the accountability needs to rest with the human. And so that's kind of principle number one. And then the second bit is around consent and, let's say, payment instructions. That needs to be visible throughout. So it needs to be very clear and then be seen throughout kind of the ecosystem, right? And that's how we've built out Visa Intelligent Commerce. I think the challenge becomes, in today's world, with the transactions we're seeing, it's very clear-cut. It's the vanilla case, I think, that Marco, you mentioned in your speech. But in the future, when you give these open-ended prompts to agents, how we are able to map those back to that kind of underlying principle of making sure the human retains control and ensure visibility across the ecosystem is going to be really, really important, particularly in Europe when you have things like PSD2 and requirements to provide very clear payments visibility on merchants, amounts, things like that.
I know. So I'm afraid we're running out of time. We've only got a couple of minutes left. But now it's time for the crystal ball question. So I'm going to ask you all to be very fast and very brave. So let's imagine this scenario. We're here at MP 2029. So what is essentially the headline you hope first you're talking about at MPA 2029 when it comes to agentic commerce, and one headline you absolutely fear? Starting with you, Ashley.
Look, I hope that we have a headline that's like, humans save 6 hours a week and by automating and then insert really annoying payments tasks there. I think from a fear perspective, check out We're Not Afraid of the future of agentic commerce. It's coming. We believe that we're well prepared. We have the right regulation, we have the right compliance, we have the right tools and systems that are going to allow merchants to navigate this really clearly for their customers. So not a lot of fear, but a lot of excitement.
Nikas.
Return rate dropped to nearly 0 thanks to agentic commerce, saving merchants tons of money, customers tons of time, and everybody's happier.
Money for everyone. I think I'm going to be a bit technical. I will, on one side, see like how to navigate 15 protocols in agentic commerce versus EMV core protocols. Because we are forgetting one thing, that this is not new in the payments industry. And we are on a race. It's like any AI companies building their own protocol and everything, but we have something called EMV core, where all the schemes and payment participants have been building standards for a year. So maybe it's time to take that into agentic commerce and build something that is really unified. Or 15 protocols. I don't know. Let's see.
Julius.
Oh, my dream headline is agentic commerce kills web forms and checkouts and 3DS.
With an applause.
And I'm European, so
I vote for that. You got my vote.
my fear is that we'll have 15 breakouts dedicated to how to combat AI-induced fraud. So, but we'll work on that, right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Eddie.
I think I'd love to see Marco give another keynote where in his graph, we're up in the top right corner, number 4, I think. And let's see, from a merchant perspective, I feel really, I think merchants are in a tough spot with all these different competing protocols. Where do they invest? What should they prioritize? And my actual desire would be that we as an industry, ecosystem, EMVCO, et cetera, are coalescing around a few standards that everyone kind of acknowledges is the route we're going. In terms of fear, I would not too afraid. Definitely fraud. I guess the big one is I hope the Berlin airport's not closed again.
Thank you very much. You've been fabulous panelists. I'm sure you will all agree that's all we have time for this morning. I hope you enjoyed this session, and I wish you a good rest of the day.